I woke up on Christmas morning to a kind of quiet that did not belong in this house. Not the soft, peaceful kind of quiet that comes when a snowfall blankets the neighborhood and everyone is still asleep. This was the kind of quiet that feels like something has been removed, a missing piece, a breath held too long. I knew it the moment I opened my eyes in my old bedroom in Beaverton, Oregon. I lay there for a moment, waiting for the familiar sounds of the house to start. For most of my life, even after I moved out on my own and only came home for holidays, I knew the rhythm of Christmas mornings here. Mom hummed while she pulled out the roasting pan, Dad flipping on the radio to some classic station. Celeste dragged her suitcase down the hall, already complaining about jet lag. Even the water heater had a particular groan at this time of year when everyone used hot water too close together. But that morning, there was nothing. No radiator clicking. No footsteps, no distant coffee grinder, not even the faint buzz of voices downstairs. At 32 years old, I was too old to expect Christmas magic, but not too old to feel when something had changed. The air itself felt still. I pushed the covers aside and swung my legs out of bed, letting my toes touch the cold hardwood. My breath made a small puff in the air. The house was colder than usual. That was my first real sign that no one had been up before me. I pulled on a sweater and stepped into the hallway. The house looked like it always did, but felt wrong. Like a stage set after the actors go home. The living room was empty and still, the Christmas lights on the tree unplugged, the ornaments catching faint gray morning light. Usually, Mom turned the lights on first thing because she said Christmas trees were meant to glow at sunrise. A silly tradition, but one I expected. I walked into the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon rolls should have been drifting through the air. I should have heard Dad scraping his chair across the floor as he sat to read his emails, even though he always claimed he was taking the day off. Instead, the counters were spotless, the sink empty, the coffee maker cold. I stood still in the middle of the kitchen, listening. I don't know what I expected to hear. A muffled laugh, the thud of feet upstairs, Mom calling my name. Something. Anything. But the silence didn't break. I opened the door to Mom and Dad's bedroom. The bed was made perfectly. Mom only made the bed like that when she was leaving the house for more than a day. Their suitcases were gone from the closet. Dad's reading glasses were missing from the nightstand. The phone charger he always left plugged in was gone. These weren't signs of a walk around the block. They were signs of a departure. Celeste's old room was next. Her perfume usually lingered for days after she visited, a sweet floral smell that filled the hallway. But now the room looked like no one had been there in weeks. The bed was neatly made. The dresser was bare. Even her favorite travel blanket was gone. She never went anywhere without that blanket, so seeing the empty room made my stomach tighten. I went back to the kitchen for my phone. I checked my messages, scrolling too fast at first, then slower. No texts. No missed calls. I refreshed the screen again and again until I started to feel foolish. Nothing had changed. The silence wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. For a moment, I thought about the last Christmas we spent together. Celeste showed up 4 hours late, and Dad acted like that was completely normal. Mom kept fussing over the turkey. We took photos in front of the tree while pretending everything was fine. Even then, I sometimes wondered if they would have noticed if I slipped out for a few hours. Now I have my answer. My head felt light, like I was floating above my own body. I opened Instagram without thinking. Habit, distraction, maybe hope. The first story at the top of my feed was Celeste's. I tapped it, and there it was. Blue water, so bright it almost hurt my eyes. Palm trees waving in a warm breeze. A plate of fresh pineapple and pastries. Celeste laughing, wearing sunglasses and a coral-colored bikini top. She looked radiant, relaxed. A version of herself she saved only for vacations. Across the screen were the words, Hawaii Christmas. My heart didn't drop the way I expected. Instead, it felt like it pressed itself into a smaller shape, compact and steady. My jaw didn't clench. My eyes didn't burn. I just watched the story a second time. Then a third. When the video ended, I stared at the black screen and my own reflection. My hair was a mess, my sweater wrinkled. I didn't look abandoned. I looked awake. I set my phone down on the counter and exhaled slowly. If you are listening to my story right now, I want to pause here and ask you something. What are you doing as you listen? Are you sitting with your morning coffee, maybe cooking, maybe resting in your car for a few minutes before heading inside somewhere? I was standing alone in my childhood kitchen on Christmas morning, trying to make sense of a silence I hadn't earned. I opened the cabinet above the sink and grabbed the cocoa mix. My hands moved automatically. I poured milk into a pot, turned the stove on, and listened to the soft whoosh of the flame catching. It reminded me of being little, when Mom used to make cocoa for me after December snowstorms. I used to stand on a stool and watch her stir the pot while the windows fogged over. I thought about that little girl now, the one who believed Christmas morning meant something permanent. I wondered what she would think of this moment. The smell of chocolate warming filled the kitchen, and for a few minutes I let myself breathe, slowly, letting the steam curl around my face. When the cocoa was done, I poured it into my chipped blue mug, the one I always used when I stayed here because it made me feel like I still had a place in this house. I carried the mug to the table and sat down. The heat soaked into my palms. Outside, the sky was a pale winter gray. A neighbor's dog barked once, then quieted. The world looked ordinary, but inside me, something felt rearranged. I thought about calling Mom, about saying Merry Christmas in a soft voice, pretending I didn't know where they were, pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending this didn't feel like a choice they had made deliberately. Mom would probably start talking fast, telling me it was a last-minute opportunity. Dad would mutter something in the background about flights and prices and plans changing. Celeste would laugh it off and tell me I should have checked the group chat that somehow I never saw. But I didn't call. Instead, I took another sip of cocoa and let the warmth steady me. I remembered the last time Celeste and I had a calm conversation. It was nearly a year earlier, before things got tense between us. She told me she felt trapped in her own life. I told her I felt invisible in mine. We both laughed like it wasn't as serious as it sounded. Maybe we should have listened to ourselves better. The clock on the microwave blinked 7:42 in the morning. I imagined the time difference. Hawaii was behind us by a few hours. They were probably just waking up in their hotel rooms, stretching, planning breakfast, not thinking of me at all. I wondered if they had talked about telling me, if they convinced themselves I would be fine, or if they deliberately left me out so they could have a trip without any responsibility, without any weight, without me. Something inside me settled then. A click. A turning point. It wasn't a heartbreak. It was clear. I set the mug down and reached for my phone again, but not to call Mom or Dad or Celeste. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found the number I needed. A man answered on the second ring. His tone was professional, calm, the kind of voice that belongs to someone used to early morning calls. I explained what I needed, keeping my voice steady. He asked a few questions. I answered them clearly. When the call ended, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. After that, I moved through the house slowly, like I was seeing it for the first time. The hallway photos, the bookshelves, the decorations we used every Christmas. Everything felt both familiar and distant. I stepped outside onto the porch and breathed in the cold morning air. Frost coated the front yard. A neighbor across the street waved, unaware of anything unusual. The ordinary world kept turning, and for once, it didn't feel like I had to keep up with it. I could stand still. I could choose something different. I went back inside and washed my mug. The water ran warm over my hands. I dried the mug carefully and set it back in its usual place. The simple act felt grounding, like I was closing a small chapter before opening another. For the rest of that morning, I sat in the living room with the tree lights still off and thought about the years leading up to this moment, the countless times I stepped in to make things easier for everyone else. During the holidays, I rearranged my schedule, and now the silence in this house told me exactly how much space I held in their lives. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't reach out to fix what I didn't break. A week later, I had 36 missed calls. I remember staring at the number on my phone, letting it sit there without touching it, without opening a single voicemail. The screen dimmed once, then went dark, reflecting my own face back at me, like a stranger I was just now getting to. No. It was the first time in my life that silence felt like something I owned, instead of something forced on me. I slid the phone into my coat pocket and walked into the living room of my small apartment in Beaverton, Oregon. Morning light was spilling through the blinds, catching on the hardwood floor. I had left my shoes by the door last night after another long intake day at the shelter clinic, and for a moment, the sight of them grounded me. I was back in my own space now, not the house I grew up in, not the house filled with expectations I could never meet. I did not call my family back. Not that day, not the next morning. Not even when the notifications doubled. People hear that part and assume it must have come from anger, but it wasn't anger, at least not in its usual form. It was acceptance. They had made a decision without me. They had flown across the ocean to spend Christmas in the sun while leaving me in the cold, and I realized that nothing I said would change the kind of people they had chosen to be. So I chose, for once, not to explain myself. The truth is, I had already made 2 calls the morning they left, just not to them. The first call I made had been to Ellison Moving and Storage. I still remember how steady my voice sounded as I spoke to the man on the other end. He introduced himself as Martin, and he had a warm, patient way of talking that made the conversation feel strangely gentle, despite the weight of what I was planning. I told him I needed to schedule a move sometime in the next 2 weeks. A full pickup. Furniture, appliances, a few boxed items. I told him it would all fit into one truck because I already knew exactly what belonged to me and what did not. I had been silently keeping track for years. He asked when I wanted to load everything. I asked what dates were available. He listed them, and I wrote them down in a small notebook I kept in my bag. Then I asked about storage options, since I knew I would not be hauling everything directly to my apartment all at once. That part made him pause for a beat, and he asked again, carefully, if I was sure I wanted full storage for several days. I told him yes, I needed time. That was the truth. When we hung up, I felt a small wave of relief. Not joy, not satisfied, just a kind of quiet steadiness I had not felt in years. It was the feeling of choosing myself without apologizing for it. The second call I made that morning was even shorter. I had found the number to a civil law office in downtown Portland. I did not know a lawyer personally, and I was not looking to hire one. I just needed clarity, one piece of information, a single moment of legal grounding before I went any further. A woman answered. Her voice was sharp and focused, the kind of tone you get from someone who has spent years sorting through arguments and filing deadlines. She asked if I wanted to schedule a consultation. I told her I had one question, and I was willing to pay whatever minimum fee they required just to ask it. She hesitated, then said she would hear the question first. I asked, slowly, carefully, if taking only the items I had personally purchased while living in my parents' home would be considered a crime. She did not ask me why. She did not ask me for names or addresses or backstory. She paused only long enough to consider the legal phrasing, then told me no. Taking items you own is not theft. She said it again in more formal terms to be sure I understood. If the receipts were in my name, if the purchases were traceable to my bank account, if the contributions were documented, then the act of removal was not criminal. She said it would be classified as a civil matter at most, not something the police would treat as a crime. Those words became the ground beneath my feet. When I ended the call, I stood still in my childhood kitchen for almost a full minute. I looked around the room I had cleaned for my family dozens of times. I looked at the dishwasher that I had paid for in full after the old one died, during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years earlier. I looked at the upgraded mixer my sister insisted Mom needed but never offered to pay for. I looked at the pantry filled with ingredients I had bought for Christmas. Dinner that would now never happen. I realized that everything I was planning was not revenge. It was a reclamation. The rest of that morning, instead of falling apart, I started making my list, not the emotional kind, not a list of grievances or memories or wounds, a practical list, a factual list, a list of items that had my initials etched into their histories whether anyone chose to acknowledge it or not. The dining table set I purchased when Dad said he was tired of the old one, wobbling. The stainless steel refrigerator Mom wanted because she said the white one was embarrassing when guests came over. The living room television, Celeste talked Dad into upgrading because she wanted a bigger screen for movie nights. The washer and dryer I bought after the old ones stopped spinning laundry properly one winter. The rug in the hallway, the lamps, the patio furniture, the vacuum. I listed the upright freezer in the garage too, the one that held extra food for holidays, but which I had personally bought, even though everyone pretended it came from a joint fund. There had never been a joint fund. There had only ever been me. My credit card, my overtime hours, my attempts to hold the family together with the things I could, actually, provide. For the first time, though, I listed all of this not to blame myself for overgiving, but to understand the reality of what was mine. While they were in Hawaii, enjoying sunshine and cocktails and Christmas brunch under palm trees, I spent my days working, sleeping, and slowly packing small things into boxes that did not rattle or give away my plans. A few sentimental items, my childhood books, some linens I had purchased myself. Nothing major yet, nothing that would be missed until I was ready. I made sure to leave my family's house exactly as they left it. Untouched, unchanged, quiet. It felt strange at first, the sound of my own restraint, but as the days passed, that quiet began to feel like strength. On the third day after they left, I sat in my apartment after dinner and looked through the small stack of receipts I had found in a shoebox under my bed. I had forgotten how meticulous I used to be about documenting things. Every big purchase had a paper trail. Every transaction had a date and an account number. I had been building a history without knowing I was building a defense. The silence from my family during that week was absolute. Not a single text. Not a single call. Not even a picture sent to me by accident. It was as if I didn't exist in their world. That part hurt the most, though I did not let myself sit with the pain long. Pain distracts. Pain can mislead. I needed clarity, not tears. By the fifth day, I could say out loud, without flinching, that they did not call because they did not think they needed to. They assumed I would be waiting when they returned. They assumed I would clean the house before they arrived. They assumed I would pick them up from the airport if they asked. They assumed my loyalty was unconditional. It took their silence for me to see the truth. My silence, in contrast, carried weight. On the sixth day, I walked through their house again, room by room, taking slow steps, letting the full reality settle into my bones. The house felt colder than before, like even the walls were aware that something was shifting. I opened the curtains in the living room and let the pale Oregon sunlight pour in, revealing every detail of a home that had never really belonged to me. I noticed things I had never really paid attention to. The small crack in the drywall above the staircase, the way the arm of the couch had faded slightly where Dad always rested his elbow. The books Mom never finished on the built-in shelves. Little pieces of a family that looked whole from the outside, but had been hollowed out for years on the inside. When I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where so much of my childhood had unfolded, I realized the truth that had been forming quietly in my chest all week. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn a place in a family that only valued what I provided, not who I was. And for the first time, I understood that my silence frightened them more than my anger ever could. By the evening of the sixth day, I finalized the list. It was long, but it was honest. It was not revenge. It was an inventory. I checked the storage contract. I confirmed the date with Ellison Moving and Storage. I rehearsed the steps in my head, not as a fantasy, but as a plan that felt clean and steady. I went to bed that night with no knots in my stomach. And then, on the seventh morning, I woke up to 36 missed calls. They were still in Hawaii when the first ones came through. A time difference of 3 hours meant they must have discovered something early. Maybe an empty space, maybe a missing box I had moved quietly. But I did not answer. I listened to none of the voicemails, though the phone kept buzzing on the counter like a trapped insect. The silence I gave them in return was deliberate now. It was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of choice. And that was the moment I realized the entire situation had shifted. The balance of power, the definition of family, the shape of the narrative, all of it. For the first time in my life, they needed me to speak, and I chose not to. I sat back in my chair, lifted my coffee to my lips, and let myself feel the steadiness of that decision settle deep inside me, knowing the days ahead would change everything. That quiet certainty opened a door in my mind that I had kept shut for years. It was not anger that pushed it open, not even hurt. It was the realization that what happened in Hawaii was not an isolated moment. It was a pattern, a story that had been written long before this Christmas morning, long before I made those 2 calls, long before my phone lit up with 36 missed attempts to pull me back into the role I had played my entire life. I leaned back and let my thoughts drift, not because I wanted to revisit old wounds, but because I finally had the clarity to see them for what they were. The truth was simple. My family had not forgotten me. They had assumed I would be there. They always assumed that, and that assumption was the root of everything. When I was a kid, Christmas in our house was bright and warm and filled with rituals. Mom decorating the tree while humming carols under her breath. David pretending not to eat the cookie dough from the mixing bowl when he thought no one was looking. Celeste darted around the house, tearing open each new gift tag just enough to see if it had her name on it. I was the calm one, the helper, the one who swept up pine needles and wiped down counters and made sure no gift tags got mixed up. Mom used to tell me I was her little organizer. David used to pat my head and say every family needed someone who paid attention. I carried those words with me into adulthood without realizing how heavy they were. By the time I reached my 20s, the roles in our family had shifted into fixed positions. Celeste lived in Los Angeles, bouncing between jobs and apartments, always in motion. Mom talked about her like she was some thrilling, fragile bird who needed cheering up. Dad bragged about her to his coworkers, calling her adventurous and creative, even when she had barely enough money to cover her rent. Me, though, I was the one who stayed in Oregon. I worked steady jobs. I paid my bills. When I came home, I brought groceries, toilet paper, cleaning supplies, or whatever else the house needed. Dad would give me that approving nod, the one I used to crave. Mom would tell me how reliable I was. Celeste would breeze in late for dinner, drop her coat on the nearest chair, and say that I should learn to relax a little. But when something broke in the house, everyone looked at me. The first big thing I paid for was the washing machine. It had sputtered and groaned through one last load of towels before stopping. Entirely, one February night. Dad stood in front of it, confused and frustrated, tapping the top like the machine would somehow jolt back to life. Mom wrung her hands and said laundry would pile up. Celeste, who happened to be visiting that weekend, shrugged and said, maybe we could hand wash things for a while. I bought a new washing machine the next day. Paid in full. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it felt like the right thing to do. Mom cried when it was delivered. Dad clapped me on the back and said I was a lifesaver. Celeste told me she never understood why appliances cost so much. The pattern continued. The old sofa sagged. I bought a new one. The living room television flickered out. I replaced it, telling myself it was a gift for the whole family. The Wi-Fi router kept dropping the signal. I upgraded it to a better model because Dad said he needed something faster for watching football. And Mom wanted to FaceTime Celeste without freezing. Groceries, electric bills, seasonal yard work, the dishwasher, the upright freezer in the garage. I covered them all, little by little, telling myself it was part of being a good daughter, part of helping Mom and Dad age comfortably, part of supporting our family. Yet no matter how much I gave, the dynamic never changed. Celeste remained the center of attention, whether she showed up or not. Mom worried about her constantly. Dad looked at her like she was a spark he didn't want to lose. I was the one who filled the gaps, who kept things steady, who cleaned up messes and quieted storms. They relied on me without seeing me. They needed what I gave, not who I was. I remember one Thanksgiving a few years ago. Celeste arrived 3 hours late, makeup half done, hair in curls, holding a bottle of wine she had grabbed from an airport shop. Mom rushed to greet her like she had been rescued from a shipwreck. Dad carried her bags upstairs. I stood in the kitchen, basting the turkey, watching through the doorway as they swarmed around her, asking questions and laughing, and offering her every comfort. When Celeste finally came into the kitchen, she kissed my cheek and said she loved that I always took care of everything. She said it like it was a compliment. Somehow it felt like a shackle. Looking back, I should have seen the truth earlier. My family did not forget me. They counted on me, counted on my reliability. counted on my silence, counted on the fact that I would always show up, always fill in, always be there, waiting when they needed a soft place to land. The problem was, they counted on me in ways that made my existence predictable to them. They did not see me as someone who could make her own choices, or someone who might one day say no. To them, I was the foundation of the house. They did not consider that foundations can crack. They did not imagine I might leave. I remember a moment 2 summers ago when Dad made a decision about repainting the house exterior. He picked a color, hired a contractor, and scheduled the work, all without asking me. When I came home that weekend and saw the ladders in the driveway, I asked when he had decided to do it. Dad waved the question off, saying he did not want to bother me with details. Mom chimed in, saying I worked too hard and she did not want to add stress to my life. But I had been the one paying the electric bill. I had been the one who upgraded their appliances. I had been the one who helped cover their gas bill during the cold snap. They had never hesitated to rely on me financially, yet they never thought to include me in any decisions about the home I helped maintain. They took my responsibility, but not my presence. The truth hit me most clearly the year Celeste decided she wanted to host a beachside birthday celebration in Santa Monica. She invited our parents 2 months in advance. She mentioned it to me in passing, saying she assumed I could make the trip since it was only a couple hours of death. Flying. When I told her I could not request time off work so easily, she laughed and said I worried too much. That weekend, the 3 of them flew down without me. They sent me a group picture afterward, smiling under the California sun. No one had thought to check if I felt left out. No one asked if I was hurt. They assumed I would be fine. They always assumed I would be fine. So when I woke up in that empty house on Christmas morning and saw Celeste's Hawaii Christmas post, the shock I felt was not really shocking. It was recognition. It was the final piece of a pattern that had existed for years. They had decided to go. They had decided not to tell me, not because they forgot me, not because of a fight, but because they assumed I would be in the same place they always left me. Available. Steady. Predictable. Waiting. It was not hatred that kept them from calling. It was convenient. The realization was not a burning one. It did not blister or sting. It settled like a soft fact in the center of my chest, as simple and heavy as a stone placed in still water. They did not forget me. They assumed I would be there. That single understanding changed the entire shape of the story. It made everything that came before Hawaii snap into focus. Every holiday, every missed invitation, every dinner where I cooked while they admired Celeste, every bill I quietly covered, every time they brushed off my suggestions, every memory I had stored in myself was like evidence of something wrong. It became obvious that Christmas in Hawaii was not the beginning of anything. It was the end of my denial. I sat in my apartment that night with the list of items I had gathered in my hut notebook. I thought about the washing machine, the sofa, the router, the refrigerator, the freezer, all the items I had purchased because my family needed them, all the labor I had done to keep the household functional, all the times I had cleaned the kitchen alone after holiday dinners while Celeste told stories that captivated everyone. I thought about how they had left without even asking if I wanted to join them, without checking my schedule, without wondering what my plans were, without acknowledging that the holiday might matter to me too. Hawaii was not a betrayal. It was a confirmation. The final confirmation that the role I played in their lives was not daughter, not sister, not part of the central circle. It was the support staff. It was the background. It was convenient. And when I finally understood that, a quiet strength filled me in a way nothing else ever had. It was not vindictive. It was not dramatic. It was clear. Hawaii was simply the last drop of water in a glass that had been full for years. As I closed my notebook and turned off the lights, I knew the truth with a certainty that felt like peace. What happened next was not a reaction. It was a correction. Once that truth settled in me, I felt something shift. It was not dramatic. There was no great emotional outburst, no tears, no shaking hands. It was more like finally feeling my own weight after years of floating around. Other people's expectations. I sat at my apartment desk late that night, the soft glow of the lamp falling over my notebook, and I wrote a single sentence at the top of a new page. Take only what is mine. It looked almost too simple, but simplicity can hold an entire history inside it. I said the words out loud in my quiet living room, testing how they felt in the air. They felt like the truth. Real truth. Clear truth. I realized then that I had never wanted a fight. I never wanted to punish anyone. I did not want to create chaos in the house I grew up in. I wanted boundaries, something my family never believed I needed, because boundaries are invisible until someone finally draws them. The next morning, I drove to the house again, parking in the familiar spot in the driveway. The winter air had that sharp scent of wet pine, and the sky was pale, the kind of cloudy gray that always seemed to hang low over Oregon in December. When I unlocked the front door, the house felt exactly the same as the day they had left for Hawaii. The quiet was still there, clinging to the corners of the rooms. I stepped inside and let the silence greet me. This time, on my own terms. I walked through the living room first. I had bought the sofa 3 years earlier, a dark, charcoal sectional that had been on sale during a Labor Day promotion. I remembered how Dad had shrugged and said the old sofa was good enough. Mom had said it was too big for the space. Celeste told me it made the room look stylish. No one asked me why I was paying for it. No one offered to split the cost. They assumed I would handle it, because I always did. My fingers traced along the armrest. This was mine. The television on the wall was also mine. I had purchased it after Dad insisted the picture on the old one was too dim. I remembered driving home with it in the trunk of my car, hoped the rain would not start before I brought it inside. I remembered setting it up, adjusting the brightness, syncing the remote, all while Mom and Dad watched from the couch like I was performing magic. The memory wasn't painful, just informative. The kitchen was next. The refrigerator was sleek stainless steel. The one Mom absolutely had to have. She said it made the kitchen look modern. The price tag had made my stomach twist at the time, but Mom said it was an investment. Dad said he would pay me back later. He never did, and I never asked. The dishwasher, the stand mixer, the air fryer, the cookware set from the Memorial Day sale. All mine. I was surprised by the calm that washed over me as I walked from room to room. I expected sadness, but there was none. The detachment I felt was steady and measured. It made things easier, almost peaceful. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and began flipping through them. Receipts I had collected over the years. I had never kept them with any strategic purpose. They had lived in my drawers and files out of habit, not intention. But now, they felt like anchors, proof of reality in a situation that had always been muddied by assumptions and expectations. I sorted them into piles. Appliances, furniture, electronics, house maintenance. I even found the receipt for the upgraded Wi-Fi router I had bought because Dad kept complaining that his football games paused at the worst moments. I remembered how he had looked so relieved when the new one fixed the problem. He had said thank you, but in that absent-minded way that made it sound like the resolution had dropped from the sky. Not from my paycheck. Every receipt I touched seemed to pull a thread loose, unraveling years of blurred lines. For the first time, I could see the division clearly. What belonged to the house was not the same as what belonged to me, and I realized just how long I had allowed myself to ignore that difference. I tucked the receipts into a folder and slid it into my bag. I was not collecting evidence for an argument. I was protecting myself. That was it. Nothing vindictive, nothing excessive. Just fairness. After I finished, I went upstairs to check the rooms. Mom and Dad's bedroom held nothing of mine. Their belongings had every right to stay exactly where they were. I did not touch a thing. I opened the drawers carefully and closed them again. This room was their space, their history, their privacy. I felt no desire to disturb any of it. Celeste's room was much the same. She had kept some childhood books on the shelf, a few framed photos, a few scarves she had forgotten on a closet hook. None of it had anything to do with me. I left everything exactly as it was, untouched. I was not there to strip the house. I was there to take myself out of it. Back downstairs, I walked into the garage. The cold air nipped at my face as I examined the upright freezer. It was nearly empty, probably because they had planned to be gone for the holidays. I opened the lid and remembered the day I bought it. Mom had complained that the old freezer stopped keeping things frozen. Dad insisted it would be fine for one more season. I used the holiday bonus from work to replace it. They never asked how much it cost. They just told me it was so thoughtful. The freezer was mine. I closed the lid gently. Later that afternoon, I sat in the living room and reviewed my belonging list. Everything on it had a receipt, a transaction history, or clear proof of ownership. Not one thing on that list was sentimental or tied to family history. I was not touching Mom's wedding china or Dad's tools or the dining table he had refinished himself years ago. I was not taking photo albums or heirlooms or anything that held emotional value for them. My list was a simple reflection of my adult contributions, nothing more. I felt good about that. Clean, even. There was no spite in my decisions. Only boundaries. Only fairness. Only the understanding that caring for people does not mean forfeiting what belongs to you. That evening, back at my apartment, I pulled out an envelope and tucked the receipts inside. I placed the envelope in a drawer with a calmness that surprised me. I had spent years feeling tangled in my family, like every choice I made was somehow tied to theirs. Suddenly, I felt free. The next day, I drove to a print shop in downtown Beaverton. I printed copies of the major receipts because something inside me said it was better to have them twice. I was not planning a confrontation, but ignorance could make people unpredictable. I wanted to be prepared in case my silence was misunderstood as weakness. Then I went home and organized everything neatly into labeled folders. It was odd how much lighter my body felt as I worked. Not happy exactly, but clear-headed. Strong, like I had finally stepped onto solid ground after years of shifting sand. Late that night, sitting on my couch with a blanket around my shoulders, I realized something important. I was not taking away their home. I was taking away the parts of myself that I had scattered too freely inside. Pieces of my effort, my money, my labor, my time, my identity. I was not clearing the house of furniture. I was clearing my life of imbalance. I whispered the truth to the quiet room around me because speaking it made it real. I am not taking the house. I am taking back my boundaries. The moment the words settled in the air, something inside me loosened. My shoulders relaxed. My chest released. I felt a sense of stillness I had not known in decades, a quiet certainty that the next steps I took would not be born from anger or resentment. They would come from self-respect, and that made all the difference. I am not taking the house. I am taking back my boundaries. That truth stayed with me over the next several days as the plan quietly unfolded. It was strange how calm everything felt. Almost like organizing a part of my life that had been out of place for far too long. The first morning, the Ellison moving and storage truck arrived. The neighborhood was still half asleep, gray fog hanging low over the roofs in Beaverton. I stood on the porch with my arms folded, watching my breath curl in the cold air while the crew stepped out of the truck. Martin, the team lead I had spoken with on the phone, gave me a polite nod before checking his clipboard. He had the kind of steady presence that made everything feel procedural, not dramatic. He walked with me through the living room, the kitchen, the garage, listening carefully as I pointed out what was coming with me and what was staying. When I finished, he said it would take several days of staggered pickups to get everything wrapped and transported to storage. I told him that was fine. I needed the time. The first few boxes went quickly. The small disappeared into the truck with soft thuds and the rustling sound of cardboard sliding into place. I stood in the middle of the living room and watched as the men lifted the coffee table I had bought 2 summers ago during a clearance sale. Seeing it go did not make me sad. It made me feel like a part of myself was finally moving forward. With each, the walls looked a little bare. The room felt a little more hollow, not empty, but honest, like the house was showing its true shape instead of the one it had worn for years with all the objects I had added to support the family. On the second day, they came back early. The fog had cleared, and the winter light streamed through the windows in a way that seemed to highlight the changes. The movers wrapped the sectional sofa in thick blankets and plastic, their movements efficient and almost gentle. Watching it leave the front door was oddly peaceful. That sofa had carried years of holiday gatherings, movie nights, and half-hearted family conversations. But it had also carried years of unspoken expectations that had weighed heavily on me. Seeing it glide down the walkway felt like letting go of all of that. Inside, the empty space left behind made the room feel larger, leaner, the kind of room you see early in the morning before life fills it again. I walked into the kitchen next. The removal of the refrigerator was a little louder, a little more complicated. I helped clear the path, and the movers slid it out with care. As they pulled it past, I caught a glimpse of a small magnet I had placed on the side years ago. A magnet from a farmer's market I visited with coworkers. I took it off quietly and slipped it into my coat pocket. Not because I was sentimental about the object, but because sometimes a small item feels like a reminder of who you were outside your family. By the third day, the house no longer looked familiar. The structure was the same, the walls standing exactly where they had always stood, but the feeling inside was different. Lighter, sharper, as if my absence was beginning to take shape before I had even stepped away completely. It was during that third morning that the mini climax arrived. I was walking outside to meet the movers when I heard the gravel crunch behind me. I turned and saw our neighbor, Mrs. Rowan, standing near her mailbox. She was wearing her usual quilted jacket and holding a stack of letters. Her expression carried polite curiosity mixed with that instinctive concern. Older neighbors often feel when something changes unexpectedly on their street. She looked from the moving truck to me, then back to the house. She stepped a little closer. "Well, that is a surprise," she said. "I hope everything is all right." Her voice was gentle, not probing, but her eyes told me she genuinely cared. I stood still for a moment, trying to decide how much to say. My family had lived beside her for years, and she had watched me grow up. She had baked cookies for school fundraisers and brought casseroles when Mom caught the flu. She knew the rhythms of our household almost as well as we did. I considered telling her the truth, but the truth felt private, tender, still settling into me. So I nodded instead and said that I was handling a few things while my family was away. Her eyes softened with understanding, even without the full picture. "If you need anything, dear, just knock," she said. Then she gave the movers a friendly smile and walked back toward her porch. I exhaled slowly, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and distance. Not everything needed to be explained. Not every story needed to be shared. Some truths could sit quietly inside you without needing validation from anyone else. When I stepped back inside, the house felt even more hollow than before. The counters were mostly cleared. The living room echoed slightly when I walked. The garage, once cluttered with boxes and tools and holiday decorations, now had a wide open space where the freezer used to sit. Just before noon, while the movers worked upstairs carefully removing the items I had marked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a delivery notification or a reminder. But when I pulled it out, I saw Mom's name on the screen. It was the first message I had received from her since they arrived in Hawaii. "Everything is okay at home." 5 words. No punctuation, no warmth. No curiosity beyond what concerned her. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting it sink into me not as a question, but as a signal. She knew something was different. Maybe she felt it in the tone of my silence. Maybe she sensed something in the space between our last interaction and this sudden check-in. Or maybe, for the first time, she noticed my absence. I did not respond, not out of spite, but because I did not owe a rushed explanation. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and returned to the living room. When the movers finished that day, one of the crew members asked if I needed help shifting anything else. I told him no, that this was enough for now. He nodded and reminded me they would return the next morning to pick up the final items. After they left, I stood alone in the quieter, bare house, listening to the low hum of the furnace kicking on. The sound reminded me of winters when I was younger, when everything felt simpler, even if it never truly was. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of what I was doing. No regret, no doubt, just the weight of stepping out of a role I had filled for too long. The house was a reflection of that, still standing, still solid, but no longer shaped around my contributions. As afternoon light faded into evening, I walked slowly from room to room, checking corners, scanning shelves, making sure I had not overlooked anything on my list. The more I moved through the space, the more I realized how much of the house had never belonged to me in the first place. My items were few but essential. Their absence altered the landscape of the home in ways that would be impossible for my family to ignore. When the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the living room floor, I gathered my things and stepped outside. The cold hit my face immediately. I locked the door behind me, sliding the key into my coat pocket with steady fingers. I knew my family would return in a few days, sunburned and relaxed from their time in Hawaii, expecting the house to be exactly the same as when they left. It would not be. I walked to my car and paused with my hand on the door handle. The porch light flickered faintly, casting a soft glow across the front steps. The house behind me was still and silent, holding its own breath. I felt a mix of sadness and relief and something else I had not yet named, a sense of stepping ahead rather than stepping away. I took a slow breath and got into my car. I had gone first. That was the truth. I had taken the step they never imagined I would take, and when they came home, they would finally see it. The day my family returned from Hawaii did not feel dramatic at first. It was just another gray winter morning in Beaverton, Oregon. Low clouds pressed against the sky, and the air smelled damp and cold. I made coffee in my apartment and stood by the window, watching a woman scrape frost off her windshield in the parking lot below. Life looked ordinary, quiet, unaware of the shift that had already happened. My phone was in the bedroom, plugged in and forgotten. I did not hear the first call, or the second. It was only when the vibration grew constant, like a dull hum that would not stop, that I walked back and picked it up. The screen lit my face in the dim room. I stared at it longer than I meant to. 36 missed calls. For a moment, I thought of the morning I woke up to an empty house, the silence, the untouched kitchen, the way I held my mug of hot cocoa and realized no one had bothered to tell me. They were leaving. Back then, the quiet had felt heavy. Now it felt deliberate. The calls were not evenly spaced. They came in waves. Mom first, then Dad, then Celeste, then the house landline. It was like they were rotating responsibility, each one trying to be the first to break through my silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let the phone rest in my hands. My heartbeat was steady. No rush of panic, no spike of fear. That alone told me how much I had changed. I opened my voicemail. The first message was from Mom. Her voice sounded tight, trying to stay polite. She said they were home. She said they were tired from traveling. She said she hoped I had a nice Christmas. The way she said it made it sound like an afterthought, something added out of habit rather than concern. The second message was Dad. He sounded confused, not angry. He said they were back, safe. He asked if I could call him when I had a chance. He paused at the end, like he expected me to answer through the recording. The third message was Celeste. Her voice cut through the speaker, sharp and irritated. She asked where the sofa was. Not hello, not how you are, just where is the sofa? I listened to the rest without stopping. The tone shifted quickly. Confusion hardened into frustration. Frustration turned into accusation. Mom asked why things were missing. Celeste said I had no right. David tried to calm them down in the background, his voice faint but present. Then came the message that made everything clear. Mom, again. This time her voice had lost its restraint. She said I was ruining Christmas. She said I was being dramatic. She told me to stop whatever I was doing and call her immediately. You are ruining Christmas. Stop being dramatic. I stared at the wall across from my bed while her words replayed in my head. They were familiar. Too familiar. Those words had followed me my entire life. Whenever I expressed discomfort, I was dramatic. Whenever I set a boundary, it was difficult. Whenever I needed space, I was selfish. Hearing them now did not hurt the way they once did. They revealed something instead. Their panic was not about me. It was about losing control. I opened my messages next. Mom's text came first, each one sharper than the last. Call me now. What is going on? This is not funny. You need to explain yourself. David's messages were shorter. Please call. Your mom is upset. We do not understand. Celeste's messages told the real story. Why did you take everything? You cannot do this. This is our house too. You are acting like a victim. Fix this now. Not one message asked why I was hurt. Not one acknowledged that they had left me behind. Not one recognized that their silence had come first. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not sadness. Not anger. Just certainty. When I had woken up alone on Christmas morning, no one had rushed to explain. No one had checked in. No one had worried about my feelings. They had boarded a plane, toasted champagne, and posted smiling photos from Hawaii, while I stood in an empty house. Now my silence was unacceptable. Now my absence was a crisis. I listened to the final voicemail from the house phone. Voices overlapped. Celeste was pacing. Mom sounded frantic. David tried to interject, but no one was listening to him. The recording ended abruptly, like the phone had been dropped. I set the phone down on the bed and stood up. My apartment felt calm. Solid. Everything inside it belonged to me. The furniture, the quiet, the choices. I walked to the window and looked outside again. The clouds were beginning to break. Thin slices of pale light pushing through. People moved through their day without knowing anything about the chaos unfolding in my family's living room. That contrast grounded me. For years, I had rushed to smooth things over, to explain, to apologize, to make sure no one else felt uncomfortable, even at my own expense. This time, I did none of that. I read every message. I listened to every voicemail. I let them say what they needed to say, and then I did nothing. The silence stretched. I imagined them standing in the altered house, staring at empty spaces where familiar objects used to be. I imagined Celeste pacing, Mom wringing her hands, Dad standing off to the side, trying to understand how something had shifted without his permission. For the first time, they were reacting to my decision instead of the other way around. That was the moment I understood how power actually worked in our family. It was not loud. It was not forceful. It was assumed. And once that assumption broke, everything else followed. I picked up my phone one last time and placed it face down on the kitchen counter. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at the small table, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator. My hands did not shake. My mind felt clear. I did not owe them an immediate response. I did not owe them comfort. I did not owe them reassurance. They had left without asking. I had acted without explaining. And in that stillness, I realized the balance had finally tipped. The story was no longer happening to me. It was happening because of me. I took a slow breath, knowing that whatever came next, I would meet it on my own terms. What I did not expect was how quickly the story would stop being mine. The first sign came the following afternoon, when my phone buzzed with a notification I had not seen in months. It was from the extended family group chat. I had muted it a long time ago, after too many holiday arguments and passive comments disguised as jokes. I almost ignored it out of habit, but something told me to look. I opened the thread and scrolled slowly. The messages were not direct. No one tagged me. No one used my name, but it was obvious who they were talking about. Someone said they could not believe how ungrateful some people could be. Another person wrote that family was supposed to stick together, especially during the holidays. A third message said it was heartbreaking when parents gave everything and got treated like this in return. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Don't panic. Recognition. They had started telling their version. I kept scrolling. The words became sharper, more specific. Someone mentioned furniture being taken. Someone else said they heard Mom and Dad had come home to a half-empty house. A message followed that said some people only cared about money and not about family values. None of it was true in the way they were saying it, but none of it was completely false either. That was the most dangerous part. A story does not have to be accurate to be powerful. It just has to be confident. I closed the group chat without responding and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet of my apartment settle around me. I thought about how many times I had stayed silent in the past when things were said about me that were not fair. I had always believed that if I kept my head down, the truth would eventually surface on its own. That belief had never protected me. Later that evening, I opened Facebook out of curiosity. something I rarely did anymore. The first thing I saw was a post from one of my aunts. She did not mention me by name, but she wrote about how parents sacrifice their whole lives for their children, only to be abandoned when those children decide they know better. The comments beneath were full of sympathy and agreement. I scrolled through them slowly, my thumb steady. People I had known my entire life were reacting with sad faces and supportive messages. None of them had called me. None of them had asked what happened. They were responding to a story they believed because it fit a familiar pattern. The ungrateful daughter, the long-suffering parents, the selfish generation. I closed the app and set my phone down on the table. That was when it finally clicked for me. This was no longer about furniture or money or even Hawaii. It was about narrative, about who got to define what had happened and why. My family had always been comfortable telling stories that cast them as reasonable and me as excessive. They were doing it again now, just on a larger stage. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a private message. It was from my cousin Brian. We were not especially close, but we had grown up together, spending summers at family barbecues and holidays squeezed around the same long dining table. Brian had always been observant, quieter than most of the others, the kind of person who noticed what went unsaid. Seeing his name on my screen made me pause. He wrote that he hoped I was okay. He said he had heard some things and wanted to check in before jumping to conclusions. He asked if I had time to talk. I stared at the message for a long moment. My first instinct was to ignore it, to protect my energy and avoid getting pulled into explanations. But something about his wording felt different. He was not accusing. He was not lecturing. He was asking. So I replied that I could talk. We spoke on the phone later that night. Brian's voice was calm, measured. He told me he had been visiting his parents when Mom and Dad stopped by earlier that day. He said they were upset and confused, telling everyone that I had taken things without warning and cut off contact. He said the way they talked about it made it sound like I had acted out of spite. He paused, then said he did not believe that was the whole story. I thanked him for saying that. I did not rush to defend myself. I simply told him what happened. That I woke up alone on Christmas morning, that no one had told me about the trip, that I had only taken the items I purchased, that I did not yell or threaten or make demands. I just acted. Brian listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said it sounded like this had been building for a long time. I told him it had. He asked why I did not say something sooner. I told him I had tried, in small ways. And when that did not work, I stopped. He did not argue with me. He did not try to play mediator. He just said he was glad I told him and that he wished the rest of the family would slow down and listen before choosing sides. After we hung up, I sat on the couch with my phone in my lap, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. Brian's call did not fix anything, but it reminded me that not everyone was committed to misunderstanding me. Still, I knew that quiet allies would not change the larger story being told. That story was spreading. It was being shaped in group chats and phone calls and living rooms I was not in. And for the first time, I understood that silence could also be a kind of consent. The conflict was no longer just about what I had taken from the house. It was about who got to decide what that action meant. For years, my family had spoken for me. They narrated my choices in ways that made them comfortable. When I stayed home, they said I preferred it. When I paid for things, they said I wanted to help. When I stayed quiet, they said I agreed. Now, they are doing it again. I realized that if I did not speak, their version would become the version. Not because it was true, but because it was louder. That night, I pulled out the folder with my receipts and documents and placed it neatly on my kitchen table. I did not look through it. I just needed to know it was there. Then I opened my notebook and wrote a short list. Not of items this time, but of principles. Stay calm. Stick to facts. Do not defend feelings. Do not argue about intentions. Say only what is true and necessary. I was not preparing for a fight. I was preparing for a conversation, one I had avoided my entire life because I believed keeping the peace was more important than being understood. As I sat there, I thought about Mom and Dad in their living room. probably replaying their version of events to anyone who would listen. I thought about Celeste, pacing, frustrated that things were not unfolding the way she expected. I thought about how unfamiliar this must feel to them, to be on the receiving end of uncertainty. I did not feel satisfaction at the thought. I felt clarity. I knew I could not control what they said to others, but I could control how I showed up when it was time to face them directly. Before going to bed, I sent one message, not to the group chat, not to an extended family, just to Mom. I said that I was willing to talk in person, that I would do so calmly, that I would not argue, and that the conversation would need to stay respectful. I did not explain. I did not apologize. I did not justify. I sat my phone down and turned off the light. For the first time, I was not bracing myself to be misunderstood. I was preparing to speak clearly, without fear, without anger, and without surrendering myself in the process. I turned off the light, knowing the next step would be face-to-face. The meeting happened 2 days later, at the house in Beaverton. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to give myself time to breathe before walking inside. The sky was low and gray again, the kind of Oregon morning that pressed down gently but constantly. I parked across the street instead of in the driveway, noticing how strange it felt not to claim that space anymore. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, trimmed hedges, the porch light still slightly crooked from when Dad tried to fix it last spring. Anyone passing by would think nothing had changed. But I knew better. I had felt the shift the moment I locked the door weeks earlier. Officer Caleb arrived a few minutes after I did. He stepped out of his patrol car with an easy calm that made me instantly grateful. Mid-40s maybe, tall, with tired eyes, and a practiced neutrality that suggested he had seen every version of family conflict imaginable. He introduced himself, asked if I was okay, and explained that he was there simply to observe and clarify if needed. No sirens, no tension, just presence. We walked up to the front door together. Mom opened it before I could knock. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders tight, her face drawn. For a split second, I saw confusion flicker across her expression, as if she had expected me to arrive angry, or defensive, or apologetic. Instead, I stood there quietly, hands relaxed at my sides. Dad stood behind her, silent, his jaw set in that way it always did when he did not know which side to stand on. Celeste hovered near the living room doorway, arms crossed, her foot tapping sharply against the floor. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. The echo was subtle but unmistakable. The missing furniture left gaps that drew the eye. The living room looked wider, barer. The kitchen felt cleaner, but emptier. The absence of familiar objects seemed to unsettle them more than their loss. Officer Caleb nodded politely and stepped just inside the doorway. He explained calmly why he was there, that he had been asked to observe and clarify the nature of the situation. His tone was neutral, unbothered. It was clear this was not unusual for him. Celeste scoffed immediately. She asked why a police officer was necessary. Her voice carried indignation, as if my choice to involve anyone outside the family was a betrayal in itself. Officer Caleb responded evenly. He said he was not there to take sides, only to confirm whether any laws had been broken. He said situations like this were often misunderstandings that benefited from clarity. Mom folded her arms tighter. She looked at me, then away, then back again. She asked why I had done this. Not why I had taken the items, but why I had brought an officer into it. I did not answer right away. I waited until Officer Caleb spoke first. He asked a few simple questions. Who purchased the items that were removed? Were there receipts? Was there any forced entry or damage to the property? I answered calmly. I told him I purchased the items myself, that I had documentation if needed, that I had not damaged the house or taken anything that did not belong to me. Celeste interrupted, saying that did not matter because it was their home, that families did not do this to each other. Her voice rose as she spoke, her frustration spilling out now that she had an audience. Officer Caleb held up a hand gently. He said he understood emotions were high, but legally speaking, ownership was straightforward. If I took items I purchased, that was not a crime. Then he said the sentence that shifted the entire room. This is a civil matter. No crime here. The words landed quietly, but their impact was immediate. Mom's posture changed. She looked at Dad, then at me, her mouth slightly open as if she had been preparing for a different outcome. Dad said nothing, his eyes fixed on the floor. Celeste let out a sharp breath and turned away, pacing toward the kitchen. Officer Caleb went on to explain that disputes like this were typically resolved through conversation or civil court if necessary. He emphasized that no police action would be taken. There was nothing criminal about what had occurred. The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. The house itself seemed to be listening. Mom finally asked, her voice softer now, why I had not just talked to them first. Why I had not called. Why I had done all of this without saying anything. I met her eyes and spoke calmly, without raising my voice, without apologizing. I said I did not feel abandoned. I said I felt excluded. I said there was a difference. Mom frowned, confused. She said they had not meant to hurt me. She said the trip had been spontaneous. She said they assumed I had my own plans. I nodded and told her that was exactly the problem. They assumed. They made a decision that affected the family without including me. They did not ask if I wanted to go. They did not ask if I had plans. They did not ask how I felt about waking up alone on Christmas morning. I said that being left out of the decision mattered more than the trip itself. Celeste snapped that I was twisting things. She said I was being dramatic again. She said normal families did not need permission to take vacations. I turned toward her slowly and said, I was not asking for permission. I was asking for consideration. I said the issue was not where they went. It was that they went without telling me, without including me, and then acted surprised when I stopped showing up the way I always had. David finally spoke then. His voice was low, hesitant. He said he did not realize I felt that way. He said he thought everything was fine. I told him quietly that things can look fine when one person does all the adjusting. Officer Caleb shifted his weight slightly, his presence steady but unobtrusive. He did not interrupt. He did not need to. The clarity had already done its work. Mom tried to explain herself again, this time more defensively. She said I could have just told them how I felt. She said families talk things out. I told her I had talked, in small ways. Over the years, I told her that when talking did not change anything, I stopped talking and started acting. I did not accuse. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated what was true. The calm in my tone seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever would have. Celeste looked like she wanted to argue, but she could not find a place to land. Mom looked torn between frustration and something like realization. Dad remained silent, his hands clasped in front of him. Officer Caleb cleared his throat gently and said that if there were no further questions, he would take his leave. He reminded everyone again that this was a civil issue and encouraged calm communication moving forward. Mom nodded stiffly. Dad thanked him quietly. Celeste did not look up. After Officer Caleb left, the house felt even quieter. I stood there for a moment, taking in the room one last time. The walls, the empty spaces, the people who had shaped my life without ever fully seeing me. I did not say anything else. I did not apologize. I did not explain further. I did not defend myself. I picked up my coat, turned toward the door, and walked out. I closed the door gently behind me. The air outside felt colder than when I arrived, sharp against my cheeks as I stepped onto the porch. I paused for just a second, not because I was unsure, but because something inside me needed to register the moment. The front door stood closed behind me, quiet, unchanged on the outside, just like the house itself. I could hear muffled voices through the wood, Celeste's sharper tones bleeding through first, then Mom's strained attempts to regain control. Dad's voice barely reached me at all. I did not turn around. I walked down the porch steps slowly, feeling the solid wood beneath my boots, grounding myself in each movement. Across the street, my car waited exactly where I had left it. The neighborhood looked ordinary, peaceful even. A couple walked their dog past the house, laughing softly about something private. Somewhere down the block, a lawn sprinkler clicked on and off, misting the damp winter air. Life was continuing, indifferent to our family drama. As I crossed the street, I felt an unexpected sense of lightness settle into my chest. Not relief exactly, more like completion. I had said what needed to be said. I had stood where I needed to stand. I had not begged, argued, or defended myself. I had simply told the truth and let it exist in the room without cushioning it for anyone else. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, closing the door with a soft thud. The interior smelled faintly of coffee and winter coats. Familiar. Mine. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and let myself breathe for a moment before starting the engine. Inside the house behind me, I knew things were unraveling in quiet ways. Mom would be replaying every sentence I said, searching for places where she could still insert her version of events. Celeste would be furious, not just about the furniture, but about the loss of control. The fact that her usual tactics had not worked. Dad would likely retreat into silence, trying to reconcile what he had just heard with the reality he preferred to believe. None of that was mine to manage anymore. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, driving slowly at first, then turning onto the main road. The familiar streets of Beaverton stretched ahead of me, wet pavement reflecting the dull winter sky. I passed the grocery store where I had shopped for years, the coffee shop where I sometimes stopped before work, the park where I used to walk when I needed to think. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. As I drove, my phone buzzed once in the cup holder beside me. I did not look at it. I did not need to. Whatever message waited there could wait longer. For the first time, urgency belonged to them, not to me. I thought about how terrifying calm can be to people who expect to fight. My family had braced themselves for anger, for tears, for accusations. They had prepared their defenses for a storm that never came. Instead, they were left standing in the quiet aftermath of clarity, with nothing dramatic to push against. That quiet would linger. By the time, then shrieks of pale brightness pushing through the clouds. I parked, gathered my things, and walked upstairs to my door. When I stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around me immediately. The familiar hum of my refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards, the faint scent of the soap I used in the kitchen, all reminded me where I belonged. I set my keys down on the counter and leaned back against it, closing my eyes briefly. My heart rate was steady. My thoughts were clear. There was no rush of emotion chasing me. No delayed collapse waiting to happen. Just a deep, quiet sense of having crossed a line I could never uncross. Whatever came next, it would be on different terms. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table, staring out the window as the day continued to unfold. Cars came and went in the parking lot. A neighbor waved as she passed below. Somewhere, a radio played softly through an open window. Behind me, in a house that was no longer mine, my family was still processing what had happened. Ahead of me, in a life that finally belonged fully to me, there was space. I sat there in silence, letting it settle not as absence, but as peace, knowing the next chapter would not be about what I had taken, but about what I was finally ready to keep. The days after that meeting did not explode the way people expect family drama to explode. There were no midnight confrontations, no dramatic shows of remorse, no sudden apology that fixed everything in one phone call. What happened instead was quieter, and in some ways, harder to explain. My life simply continued, just without the constant pull of everyone else's needs. The first week, my phone stayed mostly still. A couple of messages from Mom, short and clipped, asking if I could talk again, asking if I would come by the house to discuss the situation. Celeste sent one long text that I did not open right away. Dad sent nothing. That silence from him was familiar, but it still landed with a dull ache, like touching an old bruise and realizing it never fully healed. I did not respond immediately. I did not ignore them out of cruelty. I just moved slowly, like someone learning how to walk differently after years of limping. I needed time to understand what my boundaries actually looked like in practice. That was the strange thing about boundaries. Saying them out loud was one thing. Living inside them was another. My apartment was small, but it held my energy in a way the house never did. The living room fit a couch, a chair, and a small table by the window where I started drinking my coffee each morning. My kitchen was compact, but everything in it was mine. I could leave a dish in the sink overnight without feeling guilt. I could cook something simple without worrying about whether Dad would want seconds, or whether Celeste would complain about the season. For the first time, I could make choices without hearing my family's invisible commentary in there, back of my mind. At work, my coworkers noticed the difference before I did. One of the nurses at the clinic asked if I had gotten a new haircut. I hadn't. Another woman told me I seemed lighter. I shrugged it off at the time, but later, sitting alone in my living room, I realized what she meant. My shoulders were no longer braced. I stopped waking up with that tight feeling in my chest, the one that always came when I knew I had obligations waiting. It used to feel like my day began with a list of invisible tasks assigned to me before I even opened my eyes. Now I woke up and the day was simply mine. That kind of quiet was not emptiness. It was a room. A few days after the meeting, I went to the mailboxes in the lobby and found a small handwritten note in my slot. It was from a neighbor I had met briefly in the hallway the week I moved in. An older woman with a neat gray bob and a sweater that always looked freshly pressed. Her name was Helen Brooks. The note was short. She wrote that she had seen me carrying in boxes recently and wanted to welcome me properly. She said door if I wanted. It might sound like a small thing, but I stared at that note longer than I expected. It was kind in a simple way. A kind of kindness that didn't come with strings. No expectation, no debt, no silent demand that I repay her later by being useful. Just warmth. I wrote back a quick thank you and told her I would appreciate the soup. The next evening, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, Helen stood there holding a container wrapped in a dish towel. The smell drifting up from it was comforting, like onions and herbs, and something slow simmered. She smiled and said she hoped I liked chicken noodles. She said she made it the way her mom used to. I invited her in for a few minutes, mostly out of politeness. She stepped inside and glanced around my living room, not in a judging way, but she commented on the way the light came through the window in the late afternoon. She asked if I had lived in Beaverton long. We sat at my small table and talked for almost half an hour, not about my family, not about drama. Just about ordinary things. Weather, grocery stores, the best place nearby to buy fresh bread. She told me she moved into the building after her husband passed, and that the first year alone had been the hardest. I found myself listening closely, not because I needed her story, but because her calm honesty made me feel less strange for wanting peace. Before she left, she said something that stayed with me. She said people confuse quiet with loneliness, but they are not the same thing. She said, quiet can be a choice, and that choice can be healing. After she left, I ate the soup standing in my kitchen, still warm, still steaming, and I realized my throat felt tight. Not from sadness, but from the simple fact that kindness still existed outside the family. Structure that had convinced me love always had to be earned. The next day, I went on a long walk after work. The air was cold but clean, and the sidewalks were slick with winter moisture. I walked through the neighborhood without rushing, watching porch lights flicker on, seeing wreaths on doors, hearing distant music from someone's house. I thought about my family during that walk, not in a spiraling way, just as a fact of my life. I missed them. That was the complicated truth. I missed Mom's laugh when she was relaxed, the way she could make a room feel warm when she chose to. I missed Dad's steady presence, in the rare moments when he was truly present. The version of her from childhood when she was just my sister and not the person who always seemed to need to be the center of every story. But missing them did not mean I had to return to the role they assigned me. That was the distinction I had spent years failing to understand. You can love people and still refuse to be used by them. You can miss them and still protect yourself. You can hope for reconciliation without sacrificing your dignity to chase it. That lesson lived quietly in me as the weeks moved forward. My phone stayed mostly calm. Mom called a few more times. She left voicemails that sounded tired. She said she wanted to work things out. She said the family was hurt. She said she did not understand why it had to come to this. Sometimes her voice sounded genuinely sad. Other times, it carried frustration that I was not falling back into my usual place. Dad remained silent. That silence from him hurt in its own particular way. But I also recognized it. My silence did not make him braver. It just removed the cushion he used to lean on. Celeste's message finally appeared again as a notification at the top of my screen. I did not open it for days. It was a long stream of accusations. claiming I embarrassed the family, claiming I had humiliated mom and dad, claiming I was selfish for caring about things more than people. Instead, I focused on building the life I had been quietly craving for years. I bought a small plant for my living room, a pothos, easy to care for, something green that made the space feel alive. I rearranged my furniture until it felt right. I put my work schedule on the fridge so I could see my days clearly. I began cooking again, not for anyone else, but for myself. Simple things: a pot of chili, roasted vegetables, a pan of cornbread that filled the apartment with a warm smell for hours. Those small routines became a kind of restoration. Each one reminded me that my life did not need to revolve around appeasing anyone. As December moved toward its end, Christmas started appearing again in quiet ways. Stores playing music, people stringing lights on balconies. Helen's door is decorated with a simple wreath and a tiny ribbon. I found myself noticing it all, without the usual dread. In the past, Christmas had meant pressure, a performance, a week of cooking and cleaning, and anticipating mood swings. It meant trying to make everything perfect so nobody could accuse me of being dramatic or difficult. This time, Christmas coming felt different. It felt like an option, not a demand. One evening, Helen knocked again and asked if I wanted to join a small building holiday potluck. She said it was nothing fancy. A few neighbors, some casseroles, a card game after. She said no one expected anything, and if I didn't feel up to it, that was fine too. I surprised myself by saying yes. The potluck was simple, warm. People introduced themselves, asked about my job, told small stories about their grandchildren or their favorite old movies. No one asked me to serve them first. No one assumed I would do the dishes. When I offered to help clean up, another woman smiled and said they would all do it together. That word together felt different in my mouth than it ever had with my family. Later that night, I went home and stood by the window with a cup of tea. The parking lot below was quiet, and a few of the balcony lights in the building blinked softly like little stars. I held my mug and let myself feel the quiet settle again. I knew my family was still out there, still telling their version, still living inside their assumptions. I knew the gap between us had not closed. It might never close fully, but for the first time, I wasn't trying to force it. I was not running back to make things smooth. I was not buying peace with my time, my money, my silence. I missed them, but I did not miss the role I played. And as Christmas approached again, I realized that was exactly the point, not with alarms or expectations or the heavy feeling of needing to perform for anyone else. It arrived the way mornings arrive, when you have nothing to prove. Soft, unannounced, mine. I woke up early, not because someone needed me, but because my body naturally did. The apartment was still dark, the winter light barely pressing against the edges of the curtains. Outside, everything looked muted, as if the world itself was speaking in a lower voice. I sat up in bed and listened for a moment. No footsteps in the hallway, no clatter in the kitchen, no tension waiting for me the second my feet touched the floor. Just quiet. I padded into the kitchen and started the coffee maker. The familiar sound of it brewing felt grounding. I stood by the counter, wrapped in an old sweater, watching steam curl upward and disappear. This was the same holiday that had shattered something in me the year before, the same calendar date, the same word people wrapped so much meaning around, but it didn't own me anymore. I carried my mug to the small table by the window and sat down. The sky outside was pale and clear, the kind a few lights were already on in neighboring apartments. Somewhere down the block, I could hear laughter. Faint, but real. I thought about my family, because of course I did. They still lived in the same house. They still gathered for holidays. They still told stories about what happened, shaped in ways that made sense to them. I knew that from the bits and pieces that eventually filtered back through. Extended relatives. They didn't fall apart. Their lives didn't collapse. No dramatic downfall came crashing down, like some people imagine when they hear stories like mine. And that was fine. Karma didn't come dressed as disaster. It came dressed as distance. They lost access to me. They lost control over my time, my money, my energy. They lost the version of me who always showed up to smooth things over and absorb the discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. That was the consequence I didn't need them to suffer. I just needed to stop disappearing. Later that morning, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The sidewalks were damp, the air crisp. Some doors had wreaths, some didn't. Some people waved as they passed. Some kept their heads down, lost in their own worlds. I liked that. I liked being a person among other people, not a role defined by obligation. When I got back, my phone buzzed once. Just once. A message from Mom. Short, careful. Wishing me a Merry Christmas. Saying she hoped I was doing well. I read it, felt the familiar ache rise and settle, and then I set the phone face down on the table. I didn't respond right away, not because I was punishing her, but because I finally understood something important. Response is a choice. Silence is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is clarity. I made myself breakfast, something simple, eggs and toast, and ate slowly. I put on music I liked. I let the day unfold without rushing it into meaning. In the afternoon, Helen knocked on my door. She was holding a small plate covered with foil. She said she had made too many cinnamon rolls and thought I might want one. We sat together for a while, talk about nothing important and everything that mattered. She told me about her first Christmas alone after her husband passed, how quiet had scared her then. I told her that quiet had saved me. She smiled like she understood exactly what I meant. When she left, I stood at the window again, watching the light change as the day moved on. I thought about how close I had come to staying stuck in a life that slowly erased me. All because I thought love meant endurance. Walking away wasn't revenge. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It was self-respect. I did not win by taking furniture or making a point or being proven right. I won because I stopped asking for permission to matter. I stopped negotiating my worth. I stopped accepting scraps of consideration and calling it family. That choice changed everything. If you've ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you're listening from.